My name is Marissa Langford, and I'm 38 years old. I never imagined I'd spend another Christmas dinner being treated like a guest in my own family. Invisible, again. I watched my mother raise a glass to my brother, praising his new promotion, his luxury car, his perfect life. Then she turned to me. Still figuring things out, are you? I smiled. Something like that, I said, though I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I never do. Before I go on, let me know where you're watching from. Tap that like button, leave a comment, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. You're not alone. And this story is for you. My brother Grant sat at the head of the table, still in his suit jacket, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir like he was born for this spotlight. Mom beamed at him, almost tearful. He just got promoted to regional director. Can you believe it? 39 and already overseeing 3 states. Everyone clapped. Even Aunt Beth leaned in to ask about his new office, and someone on Dad's side mentioned how lucky Evelyn must feel to have such a successful son. No one asked me anything. I sat quietly between 2 cousins I barely recognized. My plate was full, untouched. The roast smelled good, but my appetite had vanished the moment I stepped through the door. At one point, I glanced toward Mom, hoping for, I don't know, a look, a smile. Anything that said, I see you. She looked past me and raised her voice across the table. Marissa, honey, do you want to move down a seat so Grant's girlfriend can sit next to him? I shifted without a word. Of course I did. Of course I made room. Grant's girlfriend, Chloe, I think, tossed her perfect blonde hair and gave me a tight, polite smile. I smiled back. That's what you do when you're the one everyone forgets. I used to think it was just me being sensitive. That maybe I expected too much. But year after year, gathering after gathering, the pattern never changed. Praise for Grant. Deference to Grant. And for me, awkward glances and small talk about the weather, if anything at all. After dessert, I found myself in the hallway, standing in front of an old framed photo from when we were kids. Grant, 5 years old, already grinning like he owned the world. Me, 3, clinging to a stuffed bear, half out of frame. Even in pictures, I was always just off to the side. Mom came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. You're awfully quiet tonight, she said. I turned to her, trying to read her expression. Was it concern? Curiosity? But her next words answered that. Maybe next year, you'll have something exciting to share too. It wasn't meant to hurt, I'm sure. That was the cruelest part. My mother's version of kindness always came wrapped in suggestions that I simply wasn't enough. Maybe, I said. She nodded and walked off before I could say anything more. That night, I drove home alone. Snow had started to fall, light and steady. The roads were quiet. My phone buzzed with a message from Jenna, my best friend since college. Jenna. How's the circus? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. Not comforting. Not cold. Just familiar. Eventually, I replied. Me. The usual. Grant the golden boy. I'm still the unclaimed luggage. A second later, she sent back a heart emoji and then. Jenna. You're more than they'll ever know. Come over tomorrow. We'll do real Christmas. I smiled. A real one this time. Inside, I made a cup of tea, kicked off my shoes, and curled up on the couch with an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed it again, how I always stood slightly apart. In birthday pictures, holiday shots, school events. Not forgotten. Just, not fully there. I stared at one photo a little longer. It was from my high school graduation. Grant had just finished college and stood in the center, shaking hands with our principal like he'd earned both diplomas. I was off to the side again, half hidden behind a balloon. That night, as I stared out the window at the snow piling up, I whispered to no one in particular. Maybe next year. I'll write my own story. And this time, I meant it. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. My apartment was quiet, filled with the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of old pipes. I wrapped myself in a thick cardigan, poured a cup of coffee, and stood by the window. Outside, Boston looked like it had been dipped in powdered sugar. Clean. Still. But I didn't feel clean or still. I felt displaced. Like someone had erased my name from a chapter one didn't realize I was no longer part of. I checked my phone. No messages from Mom. No late-night apology. No half-hearted check-in. Just one from Jenna. Jenna. Made cinnamon rolls. You coming? She was the kind of friend who never asked if something was wrong. She already knew. I grabbed my keys. Her apartment smelled like butter, vanilla, and safety. She handed me a plate and didn't push. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a rerun of The Golden Girls. After a while, she looked at me over her mug. So, Christmas drama? I nodded. Same show, different year. She gave a small, sympathetic smile. Want to talk about it? I hesitated. Then I said it out loud, maybe for the first time with real clarity. I think they just don't know who I am anymore. Or maybe, they never did. Jenna nodded slowly. It's like they built this version of you in their heads. And when you don't fit it, they either ignore you or try to fix you. Exactly. Like I was a crooked painting they kept trying to straighten. I sat at that table last night, and for a second, I felt like I was watching them from behind glass. Like I wasn't real to them. Just background noise. Jenna set her mug down. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? What now? On my way home, I took a detour. A long drive through Cambridge, past the bookstore I used to visit in college, past the coffee shop where I once stayed up all night reading a manuscript for a friend. All the places that reminded me of who I used to be before I tried so hard to be what they wanted. Back home, I pulled out an old journal. The spine was cracked, the pages yellowed at the edges. But it still held all the versions of me I had once loved. I flipped to a random page. December 27, 2015. I want to start something of my own. A space that's mine. A voice that isn't edited out of the room. I ran my fingers over the ink like it was a scar. How many times had I buried this voice under politeness, silence, and compromise? Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. But then my fingers began to type. Financial independence for women in their 30s. Online business courses 2024. Passive income real estate. Solo travel retreats for women. The search results lit up the screen like a lighthouse in the fog. Something stirred inside me. Not anger. Not even sadness anymore. Resolve. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. Not Grant. Not Mom. Not even myself. It was about becoming someone who didn't need a seat at the table. Because I could build my own. And maybe this time I'd sit at the head. The funny thing about clarity is that it rarely arrives with a trumpet. It sneaks in like a draft through a closed window, soft and steady, but suddenly everything feels colder. That week after Christmas, I went back to work like nothing had happened. On the surface, I was still me, marketing consultant, remote freelancer, always meeting deadlines. But under that calm, something had shifted. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was pouring cereal when I heard Mom's voice echoing from the speaker of my phone, left on the counter from the night before. It had dialed her accidentally through my smart assistant. I froze. She wasn't talking to me. She was on the phone with Grant. Oh, Marissa, she scoffed. There's just nothing to say about her. Same old, same old. Still renting that tiny place, still floating through life. Grant chuckled. She's consistent, he said, like it was a joke. I didn't hang up right away. I just stood there, spoon in hand, staring at the milk swirling around my cereal like it could give me answers. I should have cried. Or screamed. Or called her back. But instead, I picked up my phone and pressed end. Then I rinsed the bowl and sat down at my laptop like it was any other day. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just final. Something inside me went quiet, like a door that had been creaking for years finally closed. I didn't feel angry. I felt still. Like I'd stopped trying to swim against a current I was never meant to fight. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll through social media looking at everyone else's highlight reels. I sat in silence with a notebook and a single question written across the top of the page. What would it look like to live for myself? Not for approval. Not for their praise. Not to prove a point. Just, for me. I listed things. Dreams I'd shelved. Ideas I'd once scribbled on napkins. Books I'd started but never finished. Skills I'd wanted to learn. Places I wanted to visit alone, without permission. Then I circled one. Real estate investment. It had lived in the back of my mind for years, sparked by a TED Talk I watched during a layover in Dallas. At the time, I had bookmarked it and told myself, one day. Now, I opened a new browser tab. One day became day one. I signed up for a weekend seminar, nothing flashy, just a local class taught by a retired agent who believed in building slow, steady wealth. It wasn't about flipping mansions or million-dollar dreams. It was about control. Options. Ownership. The next morning, I ordered 3 books on finance, downloaded a budget app, and made a spreadsheet of every dollar I'd ever spent helping my family. The total made my chest tighten. I had given away more than I'd ever saved for myself. Rent. Car repairs. Tuition help for Grant's second degree. Wedding gifts. Medical bills for mom. Grocery money when dad was between jobs. I had given and given, believing that love and approval were things you could buy in monthly installments. No more. From that day forward, I kept my plans to myself. I didn't announce anything on Facebook. I didn't call Jenna, not yet. I simply worked. At night, I read. During the day, I took on extra freelance clients. I built a second savings account called Freedom Fund and deposited every extra dollar I made. It felt like I was watering something I thought had died years ago. A version of me no one in my family had ever truly met. But she was real. And she was waking up. January passed quietly. I stopped replying to the family group chat. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer felt the need to perform. If they noticed, no one said anything. That silence was its own kind of answer. I spent my evenings cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by highlighters, books, and pages of legal pad notes. Terms like capital appreciation and equity leverage used to sound like a foreign language. Now they felt like tools in a toolbox I had finally opened. One Friday night, around midnight, I was finishing a podcast on female investors when Jenna texted me. Jenna. Are you alive or did you join a cult? I smiled and typed back. Me. Real estate cult. We were blazers and worship compound interest. She replied with a crying laugh emoji and a heart. That was the thing about Jenna. She never needed the full explanation to get it. She trusted me, even when I disappeared for a while. By February, I had opened a Roth IRA, negotiated a raise with one of my long-term clients, and met with a retired broker named Henry who ran a small, private mentorship circle for women over 30 getting into property. He looked at me over his glasses at our first meeting and said, "Most people give up halfway through the learning curve. You don't strike me as someone who gives up." I told him I wasn't. The truth was, I couldn't afford to. Every time I felt tired or overwhelmed, I remembered my mother's voice from that accidental call. The way she said my name with that careless shrug, like I was a footnote in my own family. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to become untouchable. Henry was kind but tough. He gave me assignments, challenged my numbers, pushed me to cold call agents even when I hated the sound of my own voice on the phone. I did it all. Quietly. Consistently. There were days I wanted to give up. Nights when I stared at zoning laws and spreadsheet formulas and wondered what the hell I was doing. But I kept going. Because with every form I filled out, every phone call I returned, every dollar I funneled into that freedom fund, I was sending a message. To myself. You're not a placeholder. You're not someone's backup plan. You're not the family disappointment. You're building something no one can take from you. I stopped going to family dinners. Mom sent a few half-hearted texts, things like "coming Sunday" or "don't forget Uncle Carl's birthday." I responded politely, always with the same line. Busy with work, maybe next time. What I really meant was, busy becoming someone they wouldn't recognize. And that felt good. Liberating, even. I wasn't ready to confront them, not yet. But for the first time, I wasn't shrinking myself to keep the peace. I was expanding. Quietly, methodically, on my own terms. And the best part? They had no idea. It turns out, when people don't believe in you, they don't pay attention. That invisibility they gave me? I was learning to use it. As cover. As fuel. As freedom. March brought with it the kind of gray skies that felt like a shrug from the universe. The world wasn't cheering me on. But it wasn't stopping me either. Most evenings, I stayed in with a cup of chamomile tea, clicking through property listings I had no business looking at yet. Condos with strange floor plans. Duplexes with overgrown yards. Foreclosures with potential hidden behind peeling paint and bad lighting. Henry had warned me about analysis paralysis. He said a lot of first-time investors get stuck browsing forever, waiting for the perfect deal. But I wasn't looking for perfect. I was looking for possible. On a rainy Thursday, I saw it. A modest 3-bedroom on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. The listing photos weren't flattering: beige walls, faded carpet, outdated kitchen, but there was something about the way the late afternoon light hit the living room window. It looked like a place that just needed someone to believe in it again. I emailed the listing agent. Within 3 days, I was walking through it with Henry at my side. The place smelled like dust and old intentions. There was a loose tile in the entryway and a leaky faucet in the second bathroom. But the bones were good. Henry raised an eyebrow as we stepped into the backyard, which backed up to a small wooded area. Not a bad starter, he said. You thinking rental income? Eventually, I said. But first, home. He nodded. That was all. It felt absurd, standing there with my notebook and pre-approval letter in hand. Just months ago, I'd been wondering whether I could afford a new laptop. Now I was drafting offers. I put in a bid below asking price. They accepted the next morning. When I hung up the phone, I didn't scream or cry or jump up and down. I sat very still on my couch, the same spot where I'd once listened to my mother dismiss me like I didn't matter. This time, I mattered. Not because someone said I did. But because I had done something, on my own, for myself, with no applause and no one watching. That weekend, while everyone on Facebook posted brunch photos and tagged family members at Easter egg hunts, I was at the bank, signing paperwork that would change my life. I brought my own pen. It was a small thing, but it made me feel in control. The notary asked if anyone else would be co-signing. No, I said. Just me. After the last page, I slid the pen into my bag and walked out into the spring air. The sun had finally broken through the clouds. For once, I didn't feel behind or invisible or lacking. I felt real. Later that evening, I got a text from my mom. "Mom. Grant got a new SUV. You should come see it this weekend. He's so excited. I stared at the message for a long time. No, how are you? No curiosity about my life. Just another announcement from the Kingdom of Grant. I locked my phone and poured a glass of wine. Then I walked out to the tiny balcony of my apartment and looked up at the stars, knowing that in 30 days, I wouldn't be looking at them from this spot anymore. I'd be home. Not the kind of home anyone gave me. The kind I built. Closing day arrived on a Wednesday. I took the morning off from client calls, dressed in jeans and a navy sweater, and drove to the attorney's office with a calm that felt earned. Not the kind you fake in front of family. The kind you grow into after months of saying no to old habits and yes to yourself. The final signing was faster than I expected. Stacks of papers. Initials here, signatures there. At the end, the attorney slid a folder toward me and said, "Congratulations. You're now a homeowner." I smiled, soft and sure. Outside, I sat in my car for a few minutes, just holding the keys. They were cold and heavy in my palm, like they knew the responsibility they came with. It wasn't just a house. It was proof. That I could build. That I could follow through. That I could trust myself more than I trusted the version of me my family had been narrating for decades. I drove straight to the property. The front yard was still a mess, patchy grass, a leaning mailbox, but I saw the potential in every imperfection. Unlocking the door felt like crossing a threshold in more ways than one. No one was waiting inside to applaud. There were no balloons, no champagne, no "we're proud of you" signs. Just quiet. And that quiet was mine. I wandered from room to room, taking it all in. The creak in the hallway floorboards. The chipped baseboards in the dining room. The smell of fresh paint and possibility. I opened the windows, let the breeze move through the house, and sat on the living room floor. No furniture yet. Just sunlight spilling through the blinds, warming the space around me. And something in me, too. That night, I didn't tell anyone. Not Jenna, not coworkers, not even Henry. I wanted to hold the moment for myself a little longer, like a secret too sacred to share right away. For dinner, I ordered Thai food and ate it cross-legged on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unopened boxes and soft jazz playing from my phone. It felt like the beginning of something solid. Not dramatic. Not loud. But real. At one point, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The sky was turning a deep shade of indigo, and the trees behind the fence rustled like they were whispering congratulations. I whispered back, "Thank you." A part of me wanted to reach for my phone, take a picture, post something. Announce it. Make it undeniable. But I didn't. Because I didn't need validation. Not anymore. Instead, I sat with my journal and wrote. Today, I chose myself. Not in rebellion. Not in anger. Just, in truth. And it's enough. That entry became the first page in a new notebook. A fresh one. No scribbles from years past. No drafts of dreams I abandoned. Just clean pages, ready for the life I was finally creating. And as I sat there, with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. Not because anyone apologized. But because I had stopped waiting. This wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. Moving in was less like a grand arrival and more like slipping quietly into a version of my life I had only imagined. I didn't post a "just bought my first home" photo. I didn't call family or throw a housewarming party. The house didn't even have curtains yet, and the fridge only held almond milk, apples, and half a bottle of Chardonnay. But it was mine. Every creaky floorboard and scuffed wall. The first night, I slept on an air mattress in the center of the empty bedroom. The silence wasn't unsettling. It was complete. No voices, no passive-aggressive digs, no walking on eggshells. Just the sound of the wind brushing past the window panes and the occasional creak from the roof, like the house was stretching after a long nap. It felt like I was meeting myself again for the first time in years. By day, I still worked with clients from my laptop, balancing marketing campaigns and Zoom meetings. But at night, I changed. I became someone who checked water heaters and painted baseboards and compared interest rates like it was a hobby. I downloaded podcasts about long-term rentals and took notes like I was back in college, except this time I actually cared. There was something sacred in the solitude. For the first time, no one was demanding my time, my money, or my explanations. I wasn't being compared to anyone. I wasn't being asked when I'd figure my life out. I was too busy living it. Some nights I sat on the porch steps in sweatpants and a hoodie, sipping tea, watching the neighborhood quiet down. The house across the street had wind chimes that played the same haunting melody every time the breeze picked up. I started to look forward to it. And then, in late April, Henry called. "I've got something for you," he said. "It's small, but promising. Bank-owned duplex, not far from where you are. They're looking to sell fast." I wasn't ready. At least, that's what I told myself. I had just settled in. My freedom fund was growing, but not overflowing. I still didn't know how to use half the buttons on my HVAC panel. But I went anyway. The duplex was rough. Faded yellow paint, cracked walkway, and a yard that hadn't seen a lawnmower in what looked like years. But the structure was sound. The upstairs unit had hardwood floors hidden beneath old carpet, and the downstairs had great light. "This is how it starts," Henry said. "Not with a dream. With drywall." We walked through slowly, taking notes, calculating costs. I asked questions this time, confident ones. I knew what to look for now. Where the value was hiding. By the end of the tour, I could feel it again. That quiet resolve. That voice inside me whispering, "You're capable of more than they ever imagined." But I didn't make an offer yet. I wanted to run the numbers again, sleep on it, and, most importantly, make sure the decision came from me, not the urge to prove something. That night, I had dinner alone at a small Vietnamese place not far from the property. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with warm eyes, called me honey and brought me an extra spring roll without asking. "You look like someone who's about to do something big," she said as she refilled my water. I smiled. Maybe I am. When I got home, I turned on the porch light and sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by paint swatches and inspection notes. It didn't matter if my name was never spoken at the dinner table again. It didn't matter if they still thought of me as figuring it out. Because I was figuring it out. Every damn day. Brick by brick. Page by page. Dollar by dollar. They could keep their stories about me. I was busy writing my own. I didn't end up buying the duplex. Not because it wasn't a good deal, it was. But because I realized something important as I ran the numbers for the third time that night. I wanted my first investment property to be something I could manage on my own. No rushing. No stretching too far, too fast. Just a solid step in the right direction. That, in itself, was a shift. Old me might have jumped, desperate to prove a point. New me? She was building with patience. So I waited. I kept working. Quietly. Early mornings turned into longer evenings. I stopped counting hours and started counting momentum. It was slow, yes, and often lonely. But it was mine. Sometimes, I would catch myself staring at the dining table in my little house, still only half furnished, imagining what it would be like to have people over. Real people. The kind who didn't ask about job titles or compare life timelines. But then I'd remind myself I wasn't building this life to impress anyone. I was building it so I'd never again need permission to exist as I was. In May, I signed on 2 new clients. Both were small businesses run by women who didn't blink at my rates or ask me to justify my worth. That, too, was progress. I used the extra income to upgrade my home office. A real desk. A second monitor. A framed print of a quote that had quietly anchored me since the beginning. If they don't give you a seat at the table, build your own. Every time I looked at it, I felt steadier. I stopped going on social media. At first, it was just for a weekend. Then a week. Then a month. Not because I didn't care what others were doing, but because I finally cared more about what I was doing. No more comparing my chapter 5 to someone else's chapter 20. No more pretending to laugh at inside jokes I was never meant to be part of. There was a different kind of silence now. Not the suffocating kind I'd felt in family gatherings. This silence was intentional. Healing. Restorative. One Sunday, I went to the flea market downtown and found an old teak bench that had clearly lived many lives. The vendor, a man in his 70s with hands like sandpaper, told me it came from a church that had closed during the pandemic. I bought it on the spot. It became the centerpiece of my porch. Every morning, I'd sit there with a cup of coffee and a notebook. Not journaling. Not planning. Just being. Sometimes neighbors would wave. Sometimes I waved back. One morning, as I watered the small herb garden I had started near the back fence, I got a call from Henry. "I've got another one," he said. "This one's different. A tiny fixer-upper on the edge of town. No competition, low taxes, solid potential." I paused. I looked at my sage and rosemary and the way the sunlight hit the back of my house. Then I said, "Let's take a look." The next day, we toured the property. It was barely more than a cottage, 650 square feet, warped porch steps, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since 1983, but I felt it. That quiet spark again. This one, I said yes to. The offer was accepted in 3 days. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jenna. Not my coworkers. Definitely not my family. I drove to the property the night after closing and walked through it alone, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over years of dust and drywall. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. Just like this version of me. Not perfect. But fully present. And still rising. The cottage didn't look like much from the outside. The siding was cracked, the lawn was more weeds than grass, and the porch light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to give up or hang on. But I saw through it. I saw the bones, the potential, the quiet dignity of something neglected that still refused to fall apart. I spent my weekends with a toolbox and a playlist from the 80s, hammering, painting, sanding, learning. I YouTubed how to patch drywall, replace cabinet hardware, and fix a leaky faucet without flooding the entire kitchen. Some days I messed up. One night, I cried on the floor after realizing I'd installed the bathroom vanity backwards. But I didn't quit. The work grounded me. There was something deeply satisfying about peeling back years of damage and uncovering something solid underneath. Like the house and I were going through the same process. Strip away the assumptions, the scars, the layers other people left behind, and find what's real. I kept my day job. Still took client calls and met deadlines. But in the evenings, I changed into old jeans, tied my hair back, and turned into someone else. Someone more capable than I had ever been told I could be. By June, the inside of the cottage was transformed. Fresh paint. Clean floors. Functional kitchen. It wasn't high-end, but it was beautiful in its own humble way. I stood in the doorway one night, barefoot, holding a mug of peppermint tea, and just breathed in the silence. I didn't tell my family about it. They hadn't asked what I was doing anyway. The only message I'd gotten recently from my mother was a forwarded photo of Grant's new patio renovation. No caption. Just the image. I stared at it for a moment before deleting it without reply. The next day, I met with a local agent and quietly listed the cottage for rent. It took less than a week. A single mom and her young son came to see it. She worked as a nurse. He was 7, shy, and clutched a beat-up Spider-Man backpack. They walked through the house slowly, quietly, reverently. When they stepped out onto the porch, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "It feels safe here," she said. That was all I needed. We signed the lease 3 days later. I handed her the keys with steady hands, and after they left, I stood in the driveway for a long time. Watching the sun dip behind the trees, I felt something unexpected. Not pride. Not excitement. Peace. I had built something that mattered. Not because it impressed anyone. Not because it earned applause. But because it gave someone else a chance at stability, and gave me a sense of worth that wasn't tied to anyone's approval. That night, back at my own house, I poured a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table. I pulled out my journal and flipped to the first page, where months ago I had scribbled the question, what would it look like to live for myself? Now, I had an answer. It looked like paint under my fingernails and spreadsheets full of numbers that finally made sense. It looked like a tiny herb garden growing out back and a porch bench that caught the morning sun just right. It looked like handing a stranger a new beginning and realizing I'd just given one to myself too. No one in my family knew what I had done. No one asked. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. Because I wasn't chasing their version of success anymore. I was building mine. Quietly. Deliberately. Brick by brick. I didn't celebrate the rental deal with champagne or selfies. I didn't tell Jenna. I didn't even mark the day on my calendar. But the moment stayed with me. Every time I opened my bank account and saw that first rental payment come in, modest but real, it felt like more than just income. It felt like confirmation. That I could build stability from silence. That I could create something sustainable, without anyone else's validation, permission, or applause. Most nights, I still kept to my routine. Work. Cook something simple. Tidy the house. Listen to a podcast or rewatch one of my comfort shows. But something inside had changed. I started to breathe differently. Not shallower, not heavier. Just freer. One morning, I woke up before my alarm, slipped on my robe, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, even in early summer. The sky was soft and pale, like it was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. I stood barefoot on the back porch, coffee in hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no rush. No invisible checklist pulling at my brain. No guilt for doing less. No background noise of someone else's expectations. Just me. And the house. And the quiet. Henry called later that week to check in. I told him about the tenant, the lease, the work that still needed doing around the place. He paused, then said, "You know, I've seen a lot of people try to do what you're doing. Most burn out before they even finish their first project." I smiled. "I believe that. But you didn't," he added. "You saw it through. Clean, quiet, responsible. That's rare." It wasn't praise I needed, but something in me softened hearing it. Because it wasn't just about real estate. It was about being taken seriously. Being seen clearly. I thanked him and hung up, feeling steadier than I had in months. The next day, I visited the local credit union to open a business account under a name I had scribbled years ago in a notebook during a lunch break I barely remembered. Second Light Properties. It came from a phrase I had read once, about how certain lighthouses don't shine constantly. Instead, they flash intermittently. A rhythm. A pause. A second light. And that second light is what lets ships know where they are. I liked that idea. That even in darkness, something consistent could guide you home. So I claimed it. Registered it. Printed the name on a simple folder and placed my growing documents inside. Not flashy. Not loud. But real. That evening, Jenna invited me out for drinks with her coworkers. I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I'd gotten so comfortable in my own company that the thought of putting on small talk felt exhausting. Still, I went. We sat at a rooftop bar as the city blinked awake in the twilight. Jenna looked at me mid-conversation and said, "You've changed." I raised an eyebrow. "That bad?" She shook her head. "No. It's good. You're grounded. Like there's something in you now that doesn't need fixing anymore." I looked out over the skyline, the way the last bits of sunlight caught on the glass buildings. It was quiet between us for a moment, but not uncomfortable. She added, "I don't even know what's going on in your life anymore." I smiled. "That's because I finally stopped explaining myself." We clinked glasses. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to shrink, justify, or make anyone comfortable with the space I was taking up. I just existed. Wholly. Freely. Fully. And it was enough. The day I closed on my first personal home, the one with my name on the deed and no mortgage attached, was quiet. There were no balloons, no champagne flutes, no real estate agent smiling for a photo op. Just me, the title officer, a few crisp papers, and a smooth black pen I'd brought from home. I signed my name slowly, like each stroke carried the weight of every year I had been overlooked, underestimated, or left out. When I handed the folder back, the woman behind the desk gave me a warm, practiced smile. "Congratulations," she said. "That's a rare thing these days, paying in full." I smiled back. She didn't know what that really meant. That this wasn't just a real estate transaction. It was a reclamation. Of value. Of voice. Of identity. I left the office and drove across town to the house. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what I needed: 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a small backyard with an old oak tree whose limbs curved like open arms. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened without protest. I stepped inside. No moving boxes yet. No furniture. Just an echo, bouncing gently off the bare walls and floors like the house was taking its first breath with me in it. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just stood in the middle of the living room and listened to the silence. It sounded like freedom. For a while, I walked through every room slowly, barefoot. I opened all the windows. I let the air move through the space like a cleansing. Like I was inviting life to begin here, on my terms, without compromise. Later that afternoon, I stood on the balcony outside the primary bedroom. A cup of tea in one hand, the other resting on the railing. The neighborhood was quiet, just the hum of sprinklers and the rustle of leaves in the summer breeze. That's when I realized something that stopped me cold. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything anymore. Not to Mom. Not to Grant. Not even to myself. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't secretly hoping someone would find out and say, "Wow, Marissa. I didn't know you had it in you." Because I did know. I had always known. They just never asked. But that didn't mean I had to spend the rest of my life trying to show them. That was the trap. You chase recognition so long, you forget you're already enough. Inside, I placed the keys in a small ceramic dish I'd bought at a thrift shop months ago, not knowing why I liked it, only that it felt like something that belonged somewhere permanent. I took a shower, changed into soft clothes, and made a simple dinner: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a small glass of wine. I ate on the back patio under string lights I had installed myself. Overhead, the sky shifted from soft blue to deep velvet. One by one, stars appeared like quiet affirmations. That night, I curled up on the floor of the living room, wrapped in a quilt from Jenna, and slept under my own roof. No debt. No signatures from someone else. No eyes watching to measure whether it was enough. Just peace. And the woman who had earned it. Thanksgiving crept up before I had time to plan an excuse. The text from Mom came on a Monday evening. "MOM. Dinner at 5, same as always. Bring dessert if you want. Grant's bringing that sweet potato casserole we all love." No greeting. No question. Just a command wrapped in tradition. I stared at the screen for a while. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because, For the first time, I had options. I could say no. I could say I was busy, or traveling, or simply not interested. But something in me wanted to go. Not to prove anything. Not to pick a fight. But because I wasn't afraid anymore. So I texted back. Me. I'll come. I'll bring something. The house looked the same. Same tablecloth. Same mismatched dishes. Same framed photo of Grant in his cap and gown on the hallway wall. When I walked in, Mom gave me a quick smile and a one-armed hug. It felt more like a business handshake than a greeting. "Glad you made it," she said, then turned back to the kitchen. "We're just waiting on Grant." Of course they were. I set down my pumpkin pie on the counter, then stepped into the dining room. The table was already set, complete with place cards. I noticed mine at the far end, near the corner. Again. Grant arrived 20 minutes late, full of stories and grand entrances. New haircut. New watch. New work title. He kissed Mom on the cheek and handed her a Tupperware container like it held gold. She beamed. "I keep telling him, he should have gone into politics," she said to no one in particular. I sat in silence. Dinner was a blur of familiar patterns. Mom served Grant first. Dad nodded at every word he said. Everyone else smiled politely, laughed on cue. I chewed slowly, listening. Waiting. And then it came. Right as I reached for the gravy. Mom turned to me, her voice light, almost bored. "So, what about you, Marissa? Any plans to get settled? You still renting that little apartment?" I put the gravy down gently. There was no anger. No sting. Just clarity. I met her eyes. "I'm all set," I said, calmly. "Actually, I bought a house. A while ago." The room went quiet, like someone had pressed mute. Even Grant stopped chewing. Mom blinked. "You bought a house?" I nodded. 3 bedrooms. Paid in full. No mortgage. Forks hovered midair. No one moved. Mom's mouth opened, then closed again. Grant let out a quiet, awkward laugh. "Well, that's unexpected." I smiled. "Is it?" The silence returned, but this time it didn't make me small. It filled the room with something new. Power. Not the kind that needs to be loud. But the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And no longer needing them to agree. Grant tried to recover with charm. He leaned back in his chair, let out a light laugh, and reached for his wine glass like we were all in on some inside joke. "Well, that's impressive," he said, still smiling. "Paid in full, huh? What's your secret, Marissa? Scratch tickets? A secret investor boyfriend?" I looked at him. Really looked. For years, I had let him fill the room with noise. Smooth words. Confident gestures. Flashy updates no one ever questioned. But now, I saw through it. His smile didn't reach his eyes. There was a twitch in his jaw. A nervous glance toward Mom. It wasn't confidence. It was cover. I set my napkin down. No secret. Just discipline. Hard work. And not living beyond my means. That landed sharper than I expected. Grant chuckled again, but this time it was thin. Forced. "Hey, no judgment. We all manage things differently." Mom jumped in like she always did, trying to smooth it over. "Grant just refinanced his house, didn't you, honey? Interest rates are brutal these days. Everyone's juggling something." I turned to her. "Refinanced? We're still paying off 90% of the loan?" The words were gentle, but they silenced the room faster than a scream. Mom blinked. "What are you talking about?" Grant cleared his throat. "Marissa, that's not really your business." You made it my business, I said, still calm, when you spent the last 10 years being put on a pedestal I was never allowed near. I wasn't angry. I wasn't attacking. I was just done. I sat at this table year after year, listening to you boast about career wins while I was asked if I was still finding my path. But here's the truth, Grant. You've been covering a lot with credit cards and borrowed charm. Your success is smoke and mirrors. And everyone's been too enamored to see through it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Dad stared down at his plate. Mom's eyes shifted between us like she was watching a house collapse in slow motion. I never wanted to compete, I continued. But you all made me feel like I had to. Like the only way to matter in this family was to play a part one didn't believe in. I stood up, not dramatically, just deliberately. I didn't come here to throw stones. I came here because I no longer need to explain myself. I picked up my plate. I'm proud of what I built. Not because it's flashy. Not because it wins approval. But because it's mine. Quietly. Fully. Honestly. I turned to Mom, who still hadn't said a word. You once said I was still figuring things out. I was. And I did. Then I walked into the kitchen, placed my plate in the sink, and looked out the window into the cold November evening. Behind me, the house had gone quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence I used to dread. But the kind that follows truth when it finally walks into the room. I stayed by the kitchen window for a long time. The light above the sink flickered slightly, the same way it always had, casting soft shadows across the counter. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees like it was trying to carry something away. Inside, no one moved. I heard a fork clink against a plate, someone clear their throat. But mostly, it was quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. For years, the idea of standing up for myself had always come tangled in guilt. As if speaking truth meant I was being ungrateful. As if asking for respect meant I was stirring trouble. But tonight, there was none of that. Just clarity. Just peace. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice. It was soft. Almost small. You've never talked to me like that before. I turned around slowly. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shocked. She looked confused. I've never had a reason to, I said. She nodded, like she knew it was true. Grant had his arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes looking everywhere but mine. Dad stared down at his drink, as if maybe something at the bottom of the glass would explain how we got here. I walked back into the dining room. No one said a word. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Mom finally spoke again. I didn't know. Her voice cracked a little on the last word. I know, I said gently. You weren't supposed to. She flinched, not from the sharpness of it, but the weight. I didn't want to hurt her. That had never been the goal. But truth, even when spoken with kindness, still cuts through denial like a blade through silk. I spent years trying to earn something that was never mine to earn, I continued. I twisted myself to fit a mold that never had space for who I really was. But I'm done apologizing for not being the daughter you imagined. I'm the woman I chose to become. Grant let out a soft scoff, but didn't say anything. I looked at him, not with bitterness, but with finality. You don't have to like me. But you don't get to define me. Then I turned back to Mom. Maybe one day, we can talk. But not today. I walked toward the front door. My footsteps felt lighter than they should have. Like shedding a skin. Like unlocking a door that had been stuck for years. At the threshold, I paused. The same hallway we'd taken Christmas photos in. The same foyer where Grant's graduation banner once hung. I turned the doorknob slowly, letting the cold night air rush in. And without looking back, I stepped out. No slamming doors. No grand exit. Just me. Walking away. Not from them. But towards something better. Myself. The next morning, my phone rang just after 8. It was Mom. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, she texted. "Mom. If you have time today, I'd like to talk. Just us." I stared at the message for a while. Not out of anger, but to decide if I had the energy to open a door I'd already walked through. After some coffee and a walk around the block, I texted back. "Me. Okay. Come by at 3. I didn't tidy the house. I didn't light candles or lay out snacks. This wasn't that kind of visit. I just made tea and left the front door unlocked." When she arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing her without the usual filter of needing her to see me a certain way. She stepped inside quietly, her eyes scanning the space. I watched her take in the wood floors, the sunlight spilling through the windows, the small but intentional pieces of furniture I'd chosen myself. "This is beautiful," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." We sat at the kitchen table. I slid a cup of tea toward her. She held it with both hands, like something to anchor herself. For a moment, we said nothing. Then she spoke. "I didn't know how much you'd changed." I looked at her. "I didn't change overnight. You just stopped looking." She didn't argue. Just stared into her cup. "You always seemed so fine. Like you didn't need anything." I let out a quiet breath. That's because I learned early on that needing something didn't mean I'd get it. So I stopped asking. She flinched. "I know I wasn't fair," she said. "I always thought Grant needed more attention. More help. He demanded it. And I didn't," I replied. "So you assumed I was okay?" She looked up at me then, her eyes wet. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "I know." We sat there in silence again, not out of awkwardness, but from the weight of too much time passed and too many words unsaid. "I never meant to make you feel invisible," she whispered. "But I was," I said gently. "And you need to know that. You don't have to apologize for every moment. But I need you to stop pretending it didn't happen." She nodded, slowly. "I don't expect us to fix everything in a day," I added. "But I need space. I need you to understand that I'm not coming back into the role you had for me. I've outgrown it." Her face crumpled for a second, then steadied. "I still want to know you," she said. "The real you." I believed her. But I also knew that wanting wasn't the same as being ready. "That's going to take time," I said. She nodded again. "I'll wait." As she stood to leave, she paused in the doorway and looked back at me. "You really did it. You built a life." "I did," I said. "Even when no one was watching." She gave a small, sad smile. And then she was gone. I stood in the stillness of the room, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. It wasn't closure. But it was something else. A beginning. On my terms. The next Sunday morning was quiet. No texts from Mom. No check-ins from anyone. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like peace. I made coffee and took it out to the porch, wrapped in my favorite oversized sweater, bare feet tucked beneath me. The trees were beginning to turn. Golden burned orange leaves danced through the breeze, drifting across the sidewalk like they had nowhere urgent to be. I had nowhere urgent to be, either. And that, in itself, was a revolution. There was a time when a Sunday like this would have left me restless. Waiting for someone to need me. To call me. To assign me a place in their narrative. Now, I had written myself out of theirs. Not with bitterness. Not with revenge. Just release. That afternoon, I packed a few things in the trunk of my car, a pie I had made, a sweater I had knitted for my niece last year but never gave her, a small envelope with a handwritten note. I wasn't sure if I was going to stop by. But I wanted to be ready in case I did. I drove without music. Just the sound of my tires on the road, and the wind gently curling around the edges of my windows. As I turned onto my childhood street, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear. Not dread. More like reverence. Like entering a place that once held power over you, but no longer does. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, watching the front yard. The same faded garden gnome stood by the walkway. The same porch light that flickered even in daylight. The same wind chimes that had sung through so many awkward holidays and half-said things. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped out, crossed the street, and walked up the front steps with the envelope in hand. I tucked it gently into the mailbox. Inside was the note. Mom. Thank you for showing me who I don't want to be. And for helping me, without realizing it, become exactly who I am. I'm not angry. I'm just free. And I hope one day, you'll be too. Love. Marissa. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned to leave. As I reached the sidewalk, a single leaf drifted down from the big oak tree near the porch and landed on my shoulder. I paused. It was small. Bright red. Almost weightless. I let it rest there as I walked back to the car. I didn't look back. There was nothing left behind me I needed. Back home, I put the pie on the counter and wrapped the sweater in tissue paper. Maybe I'd give it to my niece another time. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe the act of making it had been enough. That evening, I took a long shower. Not to wash away anything, but to soak in everything I had become. I dressed in soft clothes, made a simple dinner, and lit a candle that smelled like sandalwood and rain. I curled up on the couch, legs tucked underneath me, and opened a novel I had been meaning to read for years. The kind of book you don't rush. The kind you read slowly, because the words deserve time. Halfway through chapter 3, I looked up. The living room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I thought of all the versions of myself that had once sat in rooms like this, waiting for someone to choose me. To see me. To name me worthy. And I realized. I had finally chosen myself. Fully. Without apology. Without needing anyone else to echo the decision. And that, I thought, was the real beginning. Not the dramatic declarations. Not the final goodbye. Just the quiet, unshakable knowing that I no longer belonged where I used to beg to be seen. That's the kind of freedom no one can give you. You have to walk toward it. Alone. One peaceful step at a time. The first Monday after Thanksgiving felt different. The sky was the same soft gray it always was in late November, and the street was quiet, save for a couple walking their dog and a kid riding a too-small bike in a puffy red coat. But something inside me had shifted. I woke up slowly, no alarm, no calendar reminders pulling me out of bed. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and opened all the windows. The air was cold but clean. It smelled like wood smoke and rain and some kind of promise I didn't know how to name. I didn't turn on the news. I didn't check my phone. I didn't feel behind. Instead, I opened the cabinet, pulled out a pan, and started making breakfast from scratch: eggs, roasted potatoes, fresh herbs from the garden I'd planted out back in early spring when hope was still a whisper. I played an old jazz playlist on my speaker. Ella, Billy, Chet. The kind of music that lets a day unfold without urgency. As the food sizzled, I looked around my kitchen. It wasn't designer. It didn't have marble countertops or brass finishes. But it had warm light, mismatched mugs, and the smell of something real being made. And it was mine. All of it. The house. The quiet. The rhythm I'd created. After breakfast, I wrapped a scarf around my neck and stepped out onto the porch. The teak bench I had restored over the summer was still there, weathered but solid. I sat down with my second cup of coffee and let the morning settle around me. For years, I'd lived with an invisible weight. That feeling of needing to be somewhere else. Better. brighter. More together. Like I was constantly a few steps behind in a race I didn't remember entering. But now, the finish line had vanished. And in its place, there was space. Not the lonely kind. The liberating kind. I thought about calling Jenna, just to chat. But then I remembered she had a standing meeting on Monday mornings. So instead, I pulled out a notebook and began sketching plans for my next project. Another fixer-upper, this time a small duplex near the lake. Henry had sent me the listing last week. I hadn't responded yet. I wanted to see if the excitement returned organically. And it had. But not with urgency. With clarity. I didn't feel like I was chasing anything anymore. Not redemption. Not approval. Not love in the shape of someone else's idea of who I should be. I was simply expanding. Later that afternoon, I baked a loaf of banana bread and brought it next door to my neighbor, Mrs. Lee, who'd lost her husband over the summer. We sat in her sunroom for a while, watching the squirrels run wild in the backyard. "You've been glowing lately," she said, eyes twinkling over the rim of her tea. I smiled. "I think I'm just rested." She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. Before I left, she handed me a small potted plant. "Peace lily," she said. "They like calm spaces. They're stubborn at first, but once they root, they thrive." I placed it on the windowsill when I got home. It looked like it had always belonged there. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a dusky lavender, I cooked a simple dinner, lit a candle, and turned on an old black and white movie. There was no noise. No chaos. No need to explain who I was or what I had accomplished. I was simply home. After dinner, I walked barefoot through the house, touching the doorframes, running my fingers across the walls I had painted myself. Each one was a chapter. A lesson. A scar turned into something beautiful. And as I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, watching the curtain flutter gently in the breeze, I whispered to no one. This is the life I chose. Not because it was handed to me. But because I built it. Not to prove them wrong. But to show myself what was possible. Saturday morning arrived with golden light pouring through the kitchen windows. The house was quiet, not in the heavy, waiting for something to happen kind of way, but in that sacred stillness that only comes when your soul is finally at rest. I opened the back door and stepped out barefoot, the stone path cool against my feet. The herb garden was still clinging to the last breath of fall, and a single tomato plant, stubborn and proud, offered up one final fruit. I plucked it gently, held it in my palm, and smiled. Growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in silence, wrapped in the most ordinary of moments. Jenna came over later that afternoon with a bottle of wine and a box of lemon bars. She let herself in like she always had, no need for fanfare or permission. "You look different," she said, settling into the armchair by the window. "Lighter?" I offered. "Exactly. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, books, the neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop barking. It was easy. Familiar. Safe." At one point, she looked around the room. "I've never seen you so at peace." "I think I've never been at peace," I said. "Not like this." She nodded, didn't press. That's the thing about old friends. They don't need explanations. They just know when you've arrived somewhere important. Before she left, we stood on the front porch for a minute, watching the sky turn that soft amber color that only happens in the final stretch of the day. "You did it, you know," she said. "Did what?" "Broke the cycle." I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. "Yeah. I did." After she left, I walked through the house one more time, lights dim, the smell of lemon and lavender still lingering in the air. I paused by the front door, not because I needed to leave, but because I wanted to take it in, the space, the quiet, the woman I had become within these walls. Not the forgotten daughter. Not the underachiever. Not the invisible one. Just Marissa. Steady. Whole. Free. No longer looking for a seat at someone else's table. Because I had built my own. And it was enough. The morning light spilled across the hardwood floor like warm honey. Soft and slow. No rush. No demands. I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, not an alarm. There was no calendar reminder buzzing, no list waiting on the nightstand. Just the weight of my blanket and the comfort of knowing I didn't owe the world anything today. I stretched, pulled on a robe, and walked barefoot into the kitchen. The peace in my home felt lived in now. Not new, not unfamiliar. It had rooted itself in every corner. In the scent of coffee brewing. In the hum of the heater as it kicked on. In the quiet click of the kettle settling into place. I stood by the window, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, watching the tree sway just slightly in the breeze. Everything was still. But nothing felt stuck. There was a stillness I hadn't known how to name before. Not silence. Not loneliness. Just space. To be. To breathe. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks. Like a grand moment of arrival. But it didn't. It felt like this. A morning with no noise. A room that didn't ask me to shrink. A version of myself I didn't need to edit. Later, I opened the front door to let the air in. A neighbor passed by with her golden retriever. She waved. I waved back. Nothing profound. Just connection in its simplest form. I sat down at my dining table with a notebook and pen, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to make a list or map out a plan. I just started writing. Not for work. Not for purpose. Just to let something flow. I wrote about the wind. About freedom. About what it means to come home to yourself after a lifetime of being told you were always a little too much, or not quite enough. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just smiled. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a life I had chosen. And in this life, I wasn't waiting for an invitation to matter. I had already arrived. Jenna arrived just after noon with a bottle of sparkling water and a bouquet of eucalyptus and wildflowers. No reason, she said as she stepped inside. Just felt like something you'd like. She was right. It smelled like something clean and grounded. Like something that belonged in a space that had learned to exhale. I placed the bouquet in a tall glass jar and set it on the kitchen island. The light hit it just right, casting gentle shadows on the counter. I made soup, I said. You've changed, Jenna replied, laughing. I smiled. Maybe I've just come back to myself. We ate at the table by the window. The breeze moved through the curtains in soft waves, and for the first time in a long time, there was no need to fill the silence. We talked about small things, her work, a book I was reading, the neighbor's cat who had decided my porch was its new favorite place. But then, somewhere between second helpings and the last sip of tea, she looked at me. You seem different, she said. Not in the obvious ways. In the quiet ones. I nodded. I'm not chasing anything anymore. Not approval. Not a seat at someone else's table. I think I finally realized. I'm allowed to be exactly who I am. She didn't respond right away. Then she reached across the table and gently touched my hand. I've always seen you. Even when they didn't. I felt it land. Not as a wound, but as something soft. Something that affirmed what I already knew, but needed to hear spoken out loud. I know, I said. And that's why I never got completely lost. After lunch, we moved to the porch, wrapped in light cardigans, sipping lemon water and watching the afternoon unfold. There was nothing big to solve, no emotional mountain to climb. Just two women sitting side by side, grounded in who they were, where they'd been, and what they'd survived. At one point, Jenna turned to me. So, what now? I thought for a second. I live. I breathe. I rest. And maybe I help someone else find their way, if they ever need it. She smiled. I think that's more than enough. And in that moment, with the sun warm on our faces and no weight pressing on my shoulders, I believed it too. The next morning, I opened every window in the house. The sun was already pouring in, warm and golden, painting soft shapes across the floors and walls. The breeze carried the scent of the earth waking up, like everything was stretching into itself, alive and unafraid. I stood barefoot in the center of the living room, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, listening to the stillness. No noise. No pretending. Just presence. I had nothing to prove. No narrative to defend. No empty chairs to fill. What I had was mine. Earned. Chosen. Lived. I walked out to the garden, barefoot, and sat on the bench I'd sanded and sealed with my own hands. The peace lily from Mrs. Lee bloomed beside me, a single white petal curving upward like a quiet hallelujah. And I smiled. Because I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a new story, written not by expectation, but by truth. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated, remember this. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to rewrite the story. You are allowed to choose yourself. Especially when no one else does. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fight for a seat at their table. It's building your own. In silence. In strength. In full light. If this story spoke to you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us your turning point. And most of all, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like Marissa's. Because you deserve to be reminded. You are not alone.